So we're live now. So hey, we are here with Mary the Medicine Woman. I'm Sean from RPHLA, and that's Kevin from RPHLA, and we're gonna dive into Mary's brain, because she has a lot of fascinating, things to talk about. And Mary and I go way back. She was one of the first advocates for RPHLA back, gosh, almost 2 years ago. Mary, we were talking on the phone, like before Zoom even became a thing. We were talking like.
It's true.
I'm like,
That's what I was thinking
yeah,
about.
and it was like that was before COVID hit, and it was like we hopped on a Zoom call because my former boss had just introduced me to Zoom. So now here we are, 2 years later, still buddies.
Right.
And I just thought Mary has a lot to teach men, so that's why we're here talking today, Mary. So
we have lots to learn, so I'm excited, Mary.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I just, as we were saying, I just find it absolutely fascinating during these times where there's a lot of focus on mental health, wellness around being, mentally well, suicide rates, depression, anxiety, addiction, and the white men in their like 40s, 50s have the highest rates of suicide. Yeah. And I just think that it's interesting that there's no marches or ribbons or, like awareness, I guess like mainstream media awareness, we would say, while at the same time, there's all this kind of movement of like, why aren't men more sensitive? Why aren't men more vulnerable? We need to like allow them to express their feelings. And I just find the whole situation just fascinating. It's like, it's
give us this, Mary. Like what do you, there's obviously some dissonance there and there's an obvious disconnect. So what is the reason? Like what do you kind of put, and maybe there's not one reason, I'm sure it's multifactorial, right? But what are you feeling like some of the reasons are behind the mental health issues that men are having today and the ways that we're trying to promote mental health and why it's not working, why it's not making a difference?
Oh, interesting. Okay. So I guess that, well, first of all, we're not talking about men's mental health at all, right? It's kind of that I'm hearing. I mean, I don't see a big, like to the forefront, like we're in crisis. Like our men in America are in crisis. I think they are in many ways, and I don't hear that. So I'm not sure if we could say that that's like kind of anti-man, or is it just like they don't know, or is it ignorance? Is it against something? I'm not sure. So we can't, so it's not that the messaging isn't right. I don't think there is any messaging, and I don't think there's really a place for men to connect and talk and be a part of a community like there was like back in the day. So that's why I was excited that you guys were creating this community, because I remember the first thing I thought of when Sean says we're going to have a men's group, I'm like, yes, that is just so needed. Like I kind of have my own little men's group. I used to call it the Mary Sheehan Leadership Academy for Men, Men of America, for God's sake, lead. It was a very long name, but the young men liked it. And we would just talk about ways that they struggle to lead at work and the way they struggle to lead within their families. And I really got to listen to them, especially like the young men. Like the young men I talked to today, many of them, their fathers have attempted or succeeded in suicide. And I'm like, wow, we should be very, very concerned about these young men, right? And it would be, and because maybe church and religion and the things that were more like in the past a community for men are, because religion's a little bit on the downturn too. Like church membership is down, at least in some sects of religion. So where are these guys to go, right? And the families are separated and the community is strained, and they don't have a place. And some of the, I think the messaging also at work and at home is that you need to be more like a woman, which I think is a really, really tough message for men to hear. And I don't think it's a good message, and I don't think it helps.
Wow. No, I think that's pretty powerful, Mary. I mean, I think just what you said at the very beginning, you don't feel like there's a disconnect because there's not even a conversation starter. Like it's not even on the table, to start with men. So some things that I'll say we've already noticed, like within our men's group and women's groups, just how they're evolving in general is really this interesting point. The women's group, already taking off. Like there's already a large number of women joining, right? And
Right.
you know, the leader in that, I mean, it could be that you got two nerds like Sean and I that are in charge of the men's group, and they're just like, we don't want to be with those guys. But that aside, we do notice just in general societal elements, like group mentalities or getting together with men much less attractive. Like for
Yeah.
women to get together and do things on a social aspect,
Yeah.
really, really easy. Like there's
We're
the
used
connection.
to that. We're expected to do that, right?
Yeah, that's it.
We're
Maybe
just
the
it's part of
expectation
the
is,
culture. It's
yep.
absolutely part of the culture. And I think back in the day, it was part of the culture for both groups to kind of men did their thing and women did their thing in their groups. And for some reason, like it followed through with women. And I don't know if it's because we're naturally connectors and communicators and, the weavers of relationships.
Yeah. You know, maybe that's exactly it. I mean, I know that for me, Sean, like growing up, like how did I connect with other men like over the years? Like it was always an activity. I mean, if I was
Uh,
branding cattle, if we were playing sports, like it was one of those things. If we were working outside, if we whatever the project was, something
yes.
we're getting together, like that was the bonding experience was through like
And
labor and activity, like
I
in some
love that. So
yeah.
there's something about that then, right? Like for you naturally, biologically.
hmm I believe so. I mean, at least for me, like you felt like there's a real bond between men getting together to help each other to do things
To
like
do
this,
stuff like build a
physically to do
barn
stuff
or
together.
yeah.
And I don't feel like, you know, like today, like the level of isolation that's there amongst men is really fascinating unless you're like sharing a hobby to be able to do
Agreed.
together. And look at golf, you know, for example, like golf seems to be in the trends with golf are honestly going down as well. And that was a pastime for a lot of men, especially white collar men, to be able to participate in together. And so I find it, you know, really fascinating that one, I mean, we're men, so the physical activity like kind of things, I think that goes along with the stereotype sometimes, but
Mhm.
also just the fact that we don't have those opportunities like we used to, you know, to be able to gather together and not as many kind of needs. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on just maybe just unraveling like the world of Kevin to go, hey Kevin, maybe you need to start doing some of these things,
Well,
or what we can do to
I
be able
think
to
you
get
really that what you hit on about isolation, that is just isolation. We know what that's like, right? The past 2 years, we've seen isolation across countries and communities, and it has resulted in tragedy, really, right? So being isolated and disconnected is a very bad thing for humans. So I think maybe we can all just agree on that. And so, like when I think about your men's group and how isolation is so damaging for the heart and the mind and the soul of a human being, right? And a man.
Mhm.
Um, and that traditionally men bonded over something to do. I just wonder if your group, if there could be like this common doing something, like if it had a purpose behind it, would that attract more? Like like a man might not be so attracted to, we're going to get together and chat, maybe we'll chat about our feelings, that's not so attractive. But if there's like if there's a purpose behind it that really feels good to that man and like just speaks to his heart and soul, like that would be, I'm sure they would love to have a purpose driven community.
Yeah,
I
I
like the
mean,
thought of that. Kevin, I mean, think about this where we could, just not trying to get to a solution here, but we have the map functionality in the app. It's like you start bringing in these men, show them
Mhm.
who's nearby that's a pharmacist. You're already speaking the same language. Now, okay, now let's figure out something you guys can do together, whether it's meet up like for a men's group somewhere, not talk about feelings, but maybe watch a game somewhere or something like that.
Yes, something that doesn't, yeah, it's very
Yeah,
non like threatening. Like, now what do I have to do? Now what do you expect of me? Like, do you
yeah.
expect one more thing of me? I have to do everything I'm supposed to do. Now I'm supposed to be a woman. Now I'm supposed to be that. I mean, it's too much. It's
yeah.
just it's unrealistic. And it's
Yeah,
creating more isolation because then just stay the flip home.
yeah. I mean, I think that there are some judgmental aspects about all the different pressures that are put on what a man should be, you know,
Mhm.
in general, like what they should provide for their families, what they should provide for their communities, how they should interact, you know, all of those things I think are interesting. But the to do things, you mentioned something, Mary, that I did want you to touch on is I've heard several times before that men like innately we want to fix. you know, like that's kind of the reactionary element for us, like discussing and listening and getting those kind of components locked in for
Mhm.
men is usually something that they have to develop and work on. Wanting to fix something like immediately is like, okay, how do I take it from being broken to fixed? Is kind of almost an urgent need. So inside of our men's group, like what do you think some things, like when you've looked at activities with other men, what things have been successful for you to be able to bring guys together, help them bond, help them form healthy relationships, and be able to avoid the isolation that you already have kind of highlighted? Is
Well, okay, so what I've done, like when I want to bring like my young men together, like my young pharmacy students, for example, we don't like get together to talk about work or complain about work, but a lot of them have an outside interest that like was creative. Like there was musicians and people that had their own practice with um like health bodybuilding and things like that. So I focused it around like marketing. Like, so we're gonna get together. So me and like young men, because I love marketing and I love talking about it. So we talk about how to like fix your business, how to fix your band, how to get the message on your band out there, and what are you guys doing to market? What are you saying and how you're saying it? And I never really put it together why they love that so much. Like they would like, oh, we just never get to, on, I guess on the surface it looked like a bunch of guys getting together around my dinner table with my husband and we're just talking. No, we were trying to fix something. I never thought of it that way. Like to me it's just fun because it's relationship building, and I love to hear about their struggles, and I love how their minds work, right? It's more of a straight line than my mind. My mind goes in circles and they would just like go in a straight line. Yeah, we're trying to fix their problems, like in this case, their marketing problems. Or if we did talk about work, it would be, well, how can you lead better? How can you fix you so you can be a better leader?
Mhm.
And that was really fun for them because it's like, oh, she's giving me a problem to solve and I can say whatever. There's not going to be any judgment and I'm going to get her perspective, but they could be free to fix, like just like fix. And I never thought of it that way. Like and it was just so fun for everybody because they got
Awesome.
to fix stuff.
Yeah. I love the marketing piece, Sean. I mean, what do you think about, I mean, those kind of things? You've got a ton of men that are entrepreneurs, a ton that are trying to do things with their businesses and grow them and be successful for, you know, themselves and their
Brilliant.
families.
Yeah, that is definitely a theme of this group. Yeah, people that are that yeah, and can we like just for the men's group just talk about fixing it? Even if you don't fix it, it doesn't matter. You're talking about fixing it.
I like that. I mean, I think that's a fantastic thing to be able to kind of roll out. So you've had guys that focused on like their bands, you had
Mhm,
guys that focused on their businesses or
mhm.
just being better
Yeah,
leaders, those kind of things.
yeah.
What are the things that you have noticed? I mean, it could just be from observation, Mary. It might not be from conversation. What are the things that men are struggling with the most today that maybe they takes you to peel them back a little bit to actually get to it?
Um, I think what a big struggle is that they don't have the language or the words to explain all the weird things that are going on. And it feels, I think, unnatural for them not to be able to just be who they are, say things in a straightforward way, and lead in the way they used to, because there's so much judgment and things that feel very unnatural for them to have to think about constantly.
Hmm.
And I think they feel, and I think they're hurt. I know they're really hurting inside, and because no one's talking about it and because it doesn't seem important to to anybody else, and they've seen like I said, there's a few of them, their fathers have committed suicide. Like, how do you even start to talk about that if you're a young man?
Hmm. Yeah,
And
I
not appear weak, and they don't want to appear weak. Well, because they're not weak, first of all,
yeah.
right? Yeah, they're very strong actually. And I think it would be great if we could acknowledge, like, wow, you're a young man in your 20s and your father attempted suicide or your father committed suicide, and now you're, carrying on, you've got a job and you've got maybe a wife or a girlfriend, and there you are, you're doing it in spite of that and everything that seems to be crumbling around you. It's amazing. actually.
So with the young men, I think that's really interesting to kind of get into the generational aspects of things, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, like when I got out of school, I loved geriatrics. I had a very and still have a close relationship with my grandparents. Three of them passed, but that generation, like the greatest generation, the silent generation, is the one that I really connected with as a young man. Like I just
Interesting.
respected the things that they were doing and
How lucky
respected.
for you. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think the one thing I'm really curious to know from your perspective is this: when we start to look at like the various generations of men, like in the ways that they operate, the way that they communicate, the way they connect together. One thing that's always been valuable to me is gaining perspective from various generations and then opening
Mhm.
my mind up to saying like, why do they think that way? Like what kind of changed the way that they were perceiving the world that allowed them to reframe things like that?
Yeah.
Have you done the same thing in conversations, like you said, with your husband and other men, to be able to see like why do different generations struggle with different things? And you've touched on young men, and I do think
Yes.
there's going to be a large group of our men's group that are probably 50 minus. Those are going to be.
I think so too, because the older ones may not feel like anybody of that next generation.
But
I
hopefully join, Mary. I mean, because that's the generation that I'd love to be able to pull in to be able to connect with.
Yes. Oh my God. I love that you do that. And I think that's missing from the culture too, because we don't live in like tight knit communities anymore. The family isn't together. So you don't have that constant contact with the elders. And we have a culture that likes to send them away as opposed to honoring their wisdom and bringing them in and listening. And we have like so much cancel culture. So a lot of them are just like, well, just shut the flippity flap up so that I don't say anything at all. And I think that is, again, contributing to the isolation, that disconnect from one's lineage, right? One's heritage. That's also very isolating, which I never thought about.
Yeah, I think that you just mentioned someone's heritage, which is so interesting because I mean, like you're saying, we've followed each other for a little bit. You've watched a couple of the like videos or things that I've done on different social media, and so I have a close cultural connection with what my family has done. I have it on my wall every day to
Yes.
remind me.
I
And
love that. That really struck me when you were showing that. I'm like, wow, we don't do that literally or metaphorically.
No, I appreciate that. And I think the reason why is just it was really something that I was raised in. I kind of grew up with that level of respect for my uncles and my father and my grandparents, and
Yeah.
being able to see like the things that they had done, succeeded or failed in life was a big value add to me as a young man. And now I'm getting to enjoy it through little nieces and nephews and my own, two sons on like what things am I passing down that are things I want to pass down to the next generation of men. So when it comes to a man's group, like what we're trying to bring together here, like what things do you think can, because my perspective is only mine. Like I was blessed with what I have and don't have. But from your perspective, like when it comes to men coming from all kinds of different backgrounds, how do we cultivate that? How do we like find a way for men to reconnect with all those generations and see the positives in what they bring?
Oh, that's such a good thing. I am a big believer in real life homework. So even when I had my students and all the various classes that I've taken, there'd always be like a little assignment. Do this if you want. Like I challenge you to give your grandfather a call and just ask him a few questions. I challenge you to do that. Ask your grandfather 2 questions. You get to pick them. And then the next time we have our little dinner party, we're going to talk about it. Or, with the band, I challenge you to make a post that's like we talked about, you're going to do this post on Facebook. So I challenge you to do it. And then we're going to talk about what people commented on. Give them something to do, right?
Double dog dare you.
Say that again.
I said you double dog dare them. Just tell them on the carpet.
Yes, and make it a dare. There is no way you're going to do that. I know you won't. Yeah, then they'll go do it. That's interesting too, because my husband is of a different generation than I am. And I, again, didn't realize like how lucky I am to hear things from his perspective, because he has a very different way of looking at a lot of things. I'm like, well, why did you say that? Or why do you think that about this group or that group about this situation? Because when I grew up, this is how it was. And instead of like me being like, why do you think that? That's a stupid way to think, or like kind of canceling him within my own house, I had to like really soften up and like, Mary, you need to check yourself. Like, really, do you want to know, or are you trying to challenge this man? If you want to know, then you should ask. But if you're trying to challenge this man, go back and work on yourself. So be like, okay, so I really want to know, why do you think this way? And then he would say it, and I'd be like, wow, I can't imagine growing up like that. And that's what happened when you grew up. Yeah, that's what it was like. Oh, so no wonder, and then things like shift. And it's so interesting. How lucky I am. I'll have to tell him that later. How lucky I am to know someone from a different generation that's a man. I know my dad too. It's just a different dynamic. And he's not so willing to answer like the harder questions, like, well, what was it like growing up? He's the kind of guy that kind of makes light of things.
That makes sense. I mean, I've heard, interestingly, like, as you know, like humor ends up being a fallback for so many men and women, if they're going through difficult times.
Yeah.
A lot of Vietnam veterans that I love and respect and have family members that served. They've told me many times, they said, Kevin, when you came back from something that traumatic, one, like, you didn't want to pass that burden off to your family, right? You didn't want to pass it off to your wife. You didn't want to pass it off to your kids. And so oftentimes what you're seeing is a high level of alcoholism, suicide rates going up, or people that were able to find ways to deal with it. Therapy wasn't something that was very popular during those times. So they often resorted to like finding humor in things or trying to break through those things with some kind of humorous release, right? I'm curious with your perspective on pharmacy, since we're a pharmacy centric group and care about our profession developing, and trying to pull a poor Tom Brady, but not trying to pull anything about wartime and the PTSD related to it. But we are going through a different kind of difficult time in a profession. So with that being said, like, we're seeing high levels of burnout rates. We're seeing pharmacists now at higher suicide rates, especially men.
Yeah.
So because of that in the profession, and please excuse the segue, but because of that in the profession, like, what ways do you see men in the profession being able to weather through the storm of the burnout and maybe devaluing that they are personally feeling? I know that women and men are dealing with it, but would love to hear your thoughts on how men are able to get through it.
Well, and I think the common theme, like, yeah, you're right. Like, you have to be careful with that, comparing a war. But I think one of the themes is isolation, is it not? Like, when you're through something that's so hard that there's no words for it or nowhere to go, is incredibly isolating. So again, what is the cure for isolation? It's connection. So I'm trying to think, like, so you're asking like what the men can do for themselves. And I can't help but think that this is a job for the women. I mean, like, when my men were in, like, the men in my department were in that place where I could see them kind of going into shock, they responded differently, than the women did. So I would treat them differently than the women did, than I would treat the women, which I don't know how politically correct that was, but just getting a sense of, like, when we were all feeling that, if the women were to go, like, I would say, oh, go give an encouraging word, or could you please talk to that patient? You're so good at it. Versus the man, these shelves are a catastrophe. Go fix my shelves, or whatever. Just like give him a task. He would just come back a little straighter and feeling better. Or if there's a customer that's giving me a hard time, to just connect with that thing that we said earlier. That's that fixing, defending, I am strong and I can show you kind of thing. They were happier. And so reconnecting with a part of yourself also helps being isolated, does it not? Like, if I could feel, like, in my heart, if I spent my day serving my patients and I felt my heart, I felt less isolated and stressed out. But when you're in constant fight or flight, no one is connecting with themselves, let alone other human beings. So we're all in a big room, stressed out of our mind and isolated. It's a recipe for an animal can't stay in that environment, and we're part animal, and it hurts our heart and our soul.
Yeah, I think you just hit on a lot of fantastic points there. Especially that, like, helping ourselves is an interesting thing. I mean, talking to one of our thought leaders, Eric Speck, he kind of opened my mind up to one thing. He said, Kevin, there's a lot of ways we can try to help ourselves, but I'll tell you this, there is nothing better than peer support. Like, there's a level of accountability. There is a level of, like, group mentality that is able to bring you to a certain, like, different reference or state of mind because of it. And so I thought
Accountability. Love that. Accountability is a very powerful word, isn't it?
it is.
Like, I'm going to hold you accountable to do something different. We all talked about it. Now I challenge you to do X, which is holding you in the highest esteem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think accountability comes in a few different ways. Like we can think of a corporate accountability, which is punitive, or we can think of relational accountability, which is uplifting, right? We can find a way to be able to bring people up and want the best for them. And I think that's a really powerful thing inside of peer support. Do you think that men do well in peer support settings, and how can a peer support setting be run better for men?
Yeah, I mean, I think just like we said before, just having a purpose or something to do that centers around something that's meaningful for them, right? And if it's their career, hell yeah. Yeah, like we're gonna hold you accountable and give you help you find ways to fix whatever's ailing your business, right? Could be leadership, it could be something else.
Sean, anything like in particular, bud, that you've kind of struggled with over the last like year or two? I mean, there's been career transition for you as a father of, 2 boys and supporting your family. Any things like for you that you've wished like I had this inside of a men's group or a support group to be able to help me over this time?
Good question. I had about 4 questions back there that I've lost all of them. But one thing I wanted to ask before we get to that, Kevin, Mary said this. We talked about it last time, and probably one thing I've struggled with, and probably why I'm quiet more often than not, is being politically correct.
Mm-hmm.
And especially being a man, that it's like we can find ourselves in hot water more often than not for being not correct.
You'll be canceled.
What's that?
You'll be canceled. Yeah. And again, that's very isolating. That's saying you're done. We're never talking to you again. We don't want to see you. That is so, I mean, for men and women, but I think for men, especially now, it's really harmful.
So how do we work on that? I mean,
I think what you're doing, like, just have a safe space that you guys can talk about stuff without judgment or whatever. Like, we're not here to spy on each other or cancel each other, or we're here to understand and speak freely about stuff that we'd like to see change.
Mm-hmm. No, I love that. I mean, I do think, Sean, like seeing some of the men like that are already in our group, and as we continue to grow, like they have pretty diverse perspectives. Have you seen that be something that you are able to cultivate, Mary, of bringing in people with diverse backgrounds?
I go out of my way, and it's the one thing that I tell every student that they should really do, and I challenge them to do it, is go hang out with someone who's very different than you. Mm-hmm. If you're a small white woman, go hang out with a man that's Muslim and from another country and have a conversation. And it's easy at school because there is so much background at the school. Or if you're a young man, find an older woman and ask her about what it was like to grow up in what era. So many, like socioeconomic class, race, religion. Religion's a good one, especially if you can find, if you're a religious person like I am, I like speaking to other religious people of another religion because it deepens both of our faith. Because if you're strong and just to hear something, to hear two diverse views on something as big as God, right? What is more fun than that? Yeah. But if you don't want to do that, it could just be someone from a different whatever than you, right? Went to a different school than you or whatever, but it is so important. I'm glad you brought that up. Because what happens when we do that is we see where we naturally find where we're the same. And what does that do to us? It makes us feel connected.
Yep.
The opposite of isolated.
I love that. And the one thing I think, Mary, that I'd love to get your thoughts on is I've always felt for me that getting that perspective from another man or woman makes me a better care provider, right? It opens up my mind to be able to care for patients on a whole nother level. Like it makes me better at my job. It makes me better at business and understanding those elements. Have you seen that translate as well?
I think that's interesting that you notice that, because I think there's this kind of belief that we live our life in compartments. Well, it's work-life balance. It's all that other stuff we put in our culture. I'm like, well, how do you do work-life balance? And how do you set the boundary at work? I'm like, wow, so much of who I am as a human is what I bring to my work as a pharmacist. You guys have talked about this too, right? That care. So I don't know that I separate, those out.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen it translate across when guys or gals have been exposed to those other cultures? Have you seen them as your employees be better employees or have more skills that you didn't?
They do, because but I'm like consciously saying all the time, I'm consciously saying this translates into your relationships at home. It does. Yeah. When you counsel that patient and you really listen, you don't speak first. You want to speak. You want to tell them you have a degree. No, you listen. That translates into everything. But I'm constantly connecting those dots. So I don't know if people would do it naturally. I don't know that I even did it naturally. Like realize that, wow, I'm good at relationships there. Why am I struggling with relationships at work? I'm so good at relationships here. So I had to really work on it. And now I just see that it's all me, like in a different place. It's all me.
That's fantastic. I mean, I think that there's interesting things like and I'm monopolizing because Sean and Mary got to have time together before. So now this is my time with everybody in the audience.
I've got a lot of time. We talk about the big stuff. Yeah.
I'm just kidding. So, but the other piece that I think is really interesting is like within the way that we're developing healthcare, right? And so I did a summit kind of recently that was on Native American healthcare and how to incorporate more cultural elements into the way that we develop care. Have you seen pieces related to men or to culture and kind of shifting the way that you have trained individuals to work with patients and for men to be able to connect with men or women that they are counseling with or that they're patients they have care over?
That's interesting. We, when I worked at Home Infusion, like years ago, like 15, 20 years ago, we had a lot of cultural competency because we were going into people's homes, right? The nurses were going into people's homes. So you would have to know if it was Friday night and it was an Orthodox Jewish family, you're probably not going to want to make that visit on Friday night because it's Shabbat, or if it's a culture that's matriarchal or patriarchal, right? So the one thing, then you kind of have to know that, like, who are you talking to based on the culture? And I always thought that's so interesting. And I remember the day I was listening to a podcast, it must have been like 10 years ago. And this woman was just telling this very innocent story about it was her and a group of friends were going to this spa for a girls' day. And when they walked in, there was one Black woman and 4 white women. And the Black woman was the leader. She had organized it. But the workers at the salon who were greeting them, no one made eye contact with her. In other words, they assumed that the Black woman couldn't be in charge. A white woman had to be in charge of this group of women, right? And so I thought, this is absolutely fascinating. And then I did a little bit more digging. And because of where our pharmacy was, there's Black people and white people and Black women and white women. But I realized that throughout recent American history that the Black woman is often overlooked, right? We don't look at her. And I thought that is so fascinating. So from then on, I made a vow that every day in the pharmacy that no Black woman would ever wait in line, or if she was waiting in line, she would get the eye contact before anybody else. And I don't know what people could say about this or whatever, but I will tell you, there was just something about it. And then every time I talk to the students about it, I go, don't you find that interesting? And they would, just to think about the other, like, wow, there is a whole population of people, like half of our customers most likely are never going to be looked at in the eye. How weird is that? Right? How weird. But that was a real thing. And so I also remember myself making a point to make more eye contact with every human, because we tended not to do that, right? To like, yeah, we'll be right with you, or there. It's just that like kind of connection. But yeah, just things like that. Or my Muslim men that would come in and have certain things to say about certain things. And it was always interesting. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I think that connectivity, like that rehumanizing, like what our job is really fascinating that you took such onus over it, because I've noticed talking to some other folks that oftentimes a protection mechanism for us is to dehumanize. Like we have to look at all the folks that are waiting on us as objects, right?
And then, and you kind of like shut down, which again, isolating, right? Yeah, I used to do this thing that I taught all the students at work. Every student had to learn how to do this, and I called it "Get the Thank You." Where, normally when you meet somebody, it's very natural to make eye contact when you meet somebody, right? And you start an interaction, eye contact. Well, I would teach them to have eye contact at the end of an interaction, especially if you've done something nice for somebody and they're saying thank you. You should never be turning on your heels and going back to this counter when the thank you is coming at you. You need to receive that thank you with gentle eye contact. And oh my goodness, the serotonin boost, right? And then you just gently say you're welcome. And I go, you have to get it. You got to get out there and get that thank you. And if they did, is there anything else? Do you need help with anything else? I would just wait till I got the thank you, because people first of all, they like to give it, right? And then we realize, like, just gentle eye contact, how much we all just love the same stuff, which is appreciation. Like, it's such a simple thing. And there's so much of it in the form of thank you, you're welcome, that you can just be high on serotonin for at least 10 hours. Just from you're welcome. If you get the thank you and the gentle eye contact. But I love it. It got me through. I don't know how I could have got through anything without that, really.
That one of our colleagues and our VP of advocacy, Bled, she had a post recently, Sean. I don't know if you saw that, but she talked about how much missed, Mary, the retail setting and like the relationships, like the true relationships of really knowing people and connecting with people and caring about them. And I find that so fascinating, because I felt the exact same way, when I worked at Indian Health Services in Yakima. Like, there were people that I saw and was able to help, right? I was able to help them, maybe not even with the medication related issue. It was just with their general day of asking how they were doing, if there's anything that I could do personally for them, and then make them feel like their time was meaningful, right? And that kind of human interaction just goes far beyond dispensing poison 24/7. Like,
it's such good medicine, isn't it? Like, you are the medicine then.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you're the connection. You're like, it's just everybody we're so starving for that.
Yeah. And I think with men, there's an interesting piece that will be so dismissive, at least for me, naturally. And Sean, you can tell me how you feel about that, buddy. But when it comes like someone thanking me, Mary, like, it is very natural for me to say something like, no worries, or don't mention it, or, something along those lines. Like, I'm not worthy of like the praise, like, keep that kind of thing, like it's special for you. But I've been kind of taught over the years to say, like, if you do that, you devalue the thank you, like, from the individual. You want to reward that thank you just as much as that thank you is rewarding you. So I love you highlighted that.
Yeah. You've left that thank you on the floor, and that poor person is just thinking that you didn't want it.
Yeah.
Thank you. And that was like something that came from their heart, right?
Right. Yeah. So to be able to cherish that, Sean, so I need to say thank you more often to you, and thank you to Mary for being able to join us today and to talk about some of these difficult subjects. And your welcomes, I will look you in the eye and I will be able to receive them.
Yes. You're welcome.
You're welcome, Kevin.
Yeah.
I think honestly that was the fastest, like, 37 minutes I've had in a long time.
Was that
38. So we'll have to do this again, Mary. I think there's other stuff we didn't even hardly touch on, like the depression stuff that I thought we were going to, and that's totally fine. So we'll have to come back and
because we went to connection. I think you should have a men's group where you invite women in and to solve our problems, our other problems. Because I'm telling you what, there's nothing like that straight line thinking that can sometimes just get it done. Which is a lot of reasons why I like working with the young men. I'm like, here's what I'm thinking. This is going to be blah, 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 blah. And they say, oh, you mean blah, blah, blah? Yes. Thank you. Done. Straight line thinking. Love it. Problem solved.
The cross-functional thing, Mary, I really do think that's something throughout my career that's been so powerful, is that go figure, men need women and women need men. And I feel like there's I know.
That's got to be in the book somewhere.
Kevin is just dropping wisdom. But all kidding aside, like, there's some really interesting interplay that I'll work with Rajinder on when it comes to just how can we kind of find ways to collaborate to help each other, inside of these two groups that I'd love for you to be a part of, which will be fantastic. And I really do think that there's really innate components of appreciation. And then just, you mentioned it, like, if a woman is in need, then a young man is going to want to go, how can I help? Like, how do I fix that? You know, as
I
soon
love
as
that energy. Sometimes you really need that energy. Sometimes you want to chat with your girlfriends, but sometimes you need that energy, man.
well, I mean, and vice versa. I know that when I had, I mean, some of the
Sure.
brothers I know are my technicians that I had in the past, and them, like, I could tell them being able to help me through something, like that made their day. Like them being able to just help me do something better made it more meaningful for them. And once again, we're just dropping one epiphany after the next of helping people helps ourselves. You know,
Oh
is
my God.
deal.
I'm
That's
sure
the
that's in
theme.
a book somewhere. I'm sure that's in your book, in my book, and many other spiritual books. Yes.
Amen.
Amen. All
Awesome.
right.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mary. We will
Thank
be
you,
chatting
guys.
again soon.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a lovely evening.
Awesome.
too.
Thanks for your time, Mary. Talk again.
Peace.
Bye-bye.